Today I've got an assortment of 5 different stories featuring hungry water horses, kind of polite lycanthropes, and farm demons that have absolutely no respect for your personal space. Spooky, I know. Enjoy these stories, and don't forget to drink 8 cups of holy water every day. If you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. Now, let's begin. Dumping in the woods. This story is about real people being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was 13 at the time. My best friend and I both boarded our horses at the same riding stable. It was summer break, and we were there first thing in the morning until it got dark. Our stables were next to a few houses with only a chain link fence between us. We would always notice the neighbor lady. We thought she was pretty cool. The only time we would see her, though, is when she would step out onto her porch and wait for whoever was picking her up that day. The best way to describe her is she always looked like a girl from a heavy metal music video. Big hair, red lips, sunglasses, high heels, and short dress or skirt. This happened daily, to the point where, like clockwork, she would step out of her door, dressed all up, wave to us, then get picked up in some fancy car. The last time we saw her, she was wearing a fur coat with spiked high-heel shoes. She waved to us, and this time a fancy limo picked her up. The following day, we got to the stables really early because we had planned to take a ride out in the local forest. We were always told not to ride there without adults because it was a distance away, but nobody would know. We were about 5 minutes away into the woods, and our horses began acting up. We stopped to listen when we could hear digging. Not animal wildlife digging. It was the obvious sound of a metal shovel hitting dirt. We weren't riding on the actual trail. We'd gone off the trail straight away. As we rode up the hill, we saw a minivan parked there. This wasn't the kind of public area where you should see a vehicle parked, so it startled us. The digging we had heard was coming from there. Apparently, we startled the guy that was there with his van, because he quickly grabbed a shovel, grabbed a black garbage bag, put them in his van, and left. Extremely odd, right? Maybe we'd caught him dumping trash illegally in the woods, and that's why he acted the way he did. We rode down to where the van was parked, and we saw that he had been digging a hole, a good-sized one at that, until we interrupted him. People that dump trash just dump it. What they don't do is drive to a spot through the woods that I didn't think a van could even reach, dig a hole in that deep, rocky dirt, all just to bury bags full of your TV dinner boxes. Besides the unfinished hole, there were several cigarette butts, an empty bottle of something, maybe vodka. This guy had been here a while, digging that hole. We got off our horses to go behind a tree and use the bathroom. We tightened up our cinches and headed back to the stables. Doing that, though, we ended up uncovering something in the leaves. It appeared to be duct tape. There was even a silver charm from what appeared to be a necklace or bracelet. It was in the shape of a dolphin. A couple of days go by, and we noticed we hadn't seen the neighbor lady, and for some reason her dogs that always roamed free in the yard were chained up. The day after that, those dogs are still chained up. They're agitated, barking and whining. This was very strange, and I was concerned if the dogs were being fed at all. Before we left to go home from the stables, we mentioned our concerns about the well-being of the dogs to the adult that was there. The next morning, we get to the stables, and there's a yellow caution tape and a news van and cop cars all around. The dogs were gone. The owner of the stables told us to come to the office. They had us call our parents to pick us up. They didn't give us a reason at the time. That night on the evening news, we saw it all. The reporter was standing in front of that house where the lady lived. The porch that she would stand on and wave to us was torn up. They pulled out 5 black trash bags taped with duct tape, and inside the bags were human remains. The dogs were tied up because they were trying to get to them. A few days go by and they say the remains were of the woman that owned the house. Her name was Denise. I never knew her name before. They showed footage of the suspect of her killing, being arrested at his home, and in the driveway was the minivan we saw that day in the woods. We must have rode up on him attempting to hide the bags of other body parts. That's extremely disturbing to recall. He then must have waited until nighttime to put the bags under her porch and tie up those dogs. This all happened in the 90s in Southern California, and it's something I'll never forget. Dogmen east of France. My roommate and I encountered something strange during a walk in the woods. This happened in mid-April this year on a Saturday around 4:30 p.m. The vegetation was just beginning to bud. It was a mild sunny day, some very pleasant weather at the beginning of spring. We were looking for a place after going shopping to go for a walk with my little dog. We spotted from the road a forest driveway that seemed appropriate. I had moved to the region 3 months earlier, so I hadn't gone out too much and explored. This place was entirely new to me. I had Leo, the dog, on a leash, and fortunately I didn't let him go. I had no idea what was about to happen. When we entered the driveway, I silenced my roommate for a moment, because I noticed some turtle doves singing, but in a way that I hadn't heard before. They seemed like they were yelling instead of their usual songs. I said with a smirk, as if to joke at the moment, "Well, I don't think we're alone out here anymore." We resumed our conversation while continuing to walk. As we did, all of a sudden I stopped, because I saw something moving down the path at the edge of the trees. It seemed to be a dog, but far bigger than mine, far bigger than me, actually. I told my roommate that I'd rather turn around. I wouldn't want that thing to be tangled up with Leo, because poor little Leo would not survive. However, I was very intrigued by its color. It was a deep, deep black, like a moving shadow. I raised an eyebrow and wondered, is that really a dog? Because it was beginning not to look like one at all. But being in doubt, I turned around and began to accelerate the pace back to my car. My roommate stayed behind to observe the animal better. I was walking for a couple of minutes when all of a sudden, I hear her screaming behind me. "Eveline, run!" Without looking back, convinced that what I thought was a dog was coming after us, I began running. Leo followed me without hesitating. I arrive a few meters from the car, and I stop to catch my breath. I open the door and bring up Leo. Then my gaze returns to the trail, and there I see a man of immense size, a giant of a man, with a black ebony coat entering the forest. My roommate, 3 feet away from me, was looking at him, and then came back to the car. What was also shocking were the strides he made. We guessed that they were very large, impossible for a human being. After we started the car, we were both in shock from what we'd seen. My roommate explained to me that after I turned the car around, she saw this creature enter the trail. It had a strange gait about it, as if it was slipping or tripping constantly. Then she picked up her speed and began to go up the trail back to the car, but she kept an eye on it. She saw its lower limbs that appeared to be those of a dog. Its chest was really wide. You could see how powerful it was just by looking at it. Its upper limbs, I can't say arms at this point, descended all the way to the knees. At one point, she saw it turn its head, and its profile was canine in shape. A few seconds passed with the creature looking at her, before it just decided to turn back into the woods and walk away. The two of us remained shocked for a while after driving away. What did we see? A few weeks later, we returned to the scene, and as we got out of the car, we looked at each other, acknowledging that that thing was still out there. We realized then we didn't have the courage to enter the trail once more, so we stayed away from it and found somewhere else to walk Leo. Something was in my bedroom. I'd like to preface this story that I wasn't much of a believer in the supernatural until I was 20 years old. I was in my 3rd year of college and had gotten my first apartment. I was really excited. After living in dorms for 2 years, I was tired of the college shenanigans students got up to in the dorms. I've always been more of a quiet guy. It was a small apartment, and my roommate, who I found through an ad posting, was a bit of a pompous jerk. He was an art student and acted like everyone else was somehow beneath him. I didn't care though. That suited me just fine. He kept to himself, and I kept to myself for the most part. He did have this annoying habit of going through my assigned cabinets in the kitchen and rearranging them, saying that they made no sense to him. He would get mad when I put them back the way I wanted. He had some control issues. So I'd been living there for a couple of months, and things were pretty good. I went to school, came home, studied, cuddled with my old Siamese cat, Sam. She was always sweet to me, but could be pretty aggressive with other people and animals. But then, one night, something happened that I'll never forget. I woke up to the sensation of something on my back. Now, I sleep on my stomach, and I just assumed my cat decided to lay on top of me, which wasn't too weird. It was hot in the middle of August in Georgia. "Sam," I said, half asleep. "It's too hot. Get off me." I shifted my body around, but didn't feel her move off. I was starting to get a little annoyed and was starting to wake up a bit more. But then I heard Sam let out a hiss and a feline growl. That really got my attention, because it wasn't coming from behind me. I opened my eyes and I could see the silhouette of my cat on my desk, the lights from the parking lot coming in from the window behind her. She appeared to be crouched defensively with her ears pulled back. I became aware that what was on my back was not my cat and was far heavier than Sam anyway. It had more the weight of a mid-sized to large dog. My heart pounded because I had no idea what was on me. I began to push myself up and turn over, afraid of what I was going to find. But before I could get myself turned over, the weight on my back shifted, like whatever it was had suddenly set up and became much heavier. I could feel 2 distinct points applying pressure to my shoulders. I was forced down flat onto my stomach. I closed my eyes out of fear. I could feel breath on my cheek and ear. It had a smell to it that reminded me of sulfur and rotten eggs. What came next will haunt me till the day I die. A vicious growl that was almost like a dog's snarl, only it had distorted and unnatural quality to it. Whatever this was, I knew now that it meant to do me harm. The malicious intent was radiating from it. I kept my eyes closed, but I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. I'm going to die, I thought. Being a science major, I've always considered myself more of an agnostic, not religious, but I was raised Catholic, and at this point the only thing I could think of was to pray. I'm actually a little ashamed to admit it. Makes me feel like I was a desperate coward, that I would just roll over and die rather than fight. But I digress. So I pulled out the first prayer that came to mind, probably the same prayer that comes to mind for anyone, the Lord's Prayer. I started to pray, and I could feel the breath on my cheek again as it let out another growl. I could feel its weight shifting down onto my shoulders more. My eyes stayed closed. I had barely rattled off the first 2 lines of the prayer when I suddenly felt the weight dissipate. It didn't jump off of me, it just evaporated. I kept my eyes closed still, crying an unfinished prayer. When I opened my eyes, I could still see the cat on my desk. It was crouching there, clearly angry at something. I shakily reached over to my bedside lamp and turned it on. I looked over my shoulder, then turned over, but there was nothing. I crawled out of bed and walked over to the bedroom door. The door was locked. I checked the closet too, but it was empty. The room felt stuffy, even more so than normal for summer, so I turned the fan on. I didn't go back to sleep that night. The next day, I told my roommate that I wanted a priest to come by and bless my bedroom and the house. I made up some story about it being an Irish tradition to bless your home because I couldn't bring myself to tell him what I'd experienced. He was furious that I wanted to have a priest over and said it was stupid. Like I said, he was a bit of a jerk, but I didn't care. I told him we'd stay out of his room and let him know when one was coming by, in case he didn't want to be here, if it upset him that much. And we left it at that. I wouldn't say this experience made me a religious person by any means, but I would definitely say it has made me much, much more open-minded to spiritual and metaphysical concepts, like ghosts and demons. I don't know what was in my room. Maybe it was a demon or an evil entity, maybe it wasn't. But what I am saying is that I can't explain or rationalize it away. I know what sleep paralysis is, and from my understanding, people that have had episodes of it can't move or even speak during an episode. Maybe they can, but I'm no expert. I'll say that I will never not remember that night and the fear it left me with. It came from the sea. I am a simple Irish lad, and I lived there most of my life. I was a bit obsessed with cultures and history, so I tended to see the world as often as I could. I was traveling around Northern Ireland. It was my vacation, and I loved to visit my Scottish side of the family around Christmas who lived there. My Scottish relatives moved to Northern Ireland a few years ago, so I was making my way to their town. I'm from Dublin, so it wasn't one of my longer adventures. And everything was going well at the time. I'd been driving a while and decided to stop and take a bit of a break. I parked on the side of the road, expecting to get a nice relaxing walk in. Just down a short path from where I'd parked, there seemed to be a shoreline, so that's where I headed, expecting a peaceful journey. Quite some time had passed and I'd made it far down the shoreline when I noticed something strange. I thought that I was looking at the outline of a man in the water, but it was winter, mind you. This man was way out there, not moving by the looks of it. The closer I got, the stranger it seemed, for the man started to look increasingly wrong by the second. His body was so thin, and his proportions seemed disfigured. His head looked a bit big, and his arms hung down like anchors. It was at this moment that I realized that his head was tilted in a very eerie and banjaxed manner. I needed to get a closer look at it, so I moved closer only to find myself frozen still. I could see him very clearly now, just facing me with the eyeless visage of a corpse. This thing's body seemed to lack skin to cover its disgusting features. The eye sockets were pitch black. Its head had a few strands of black hairs, and the tipless mouth gave a chilling grin, filled with pointed teeth. I couldn't bear to look at the thing much longer, so I hurried back to my car. Just before I made it to the trail that led to my car, I was stopped by a strange noise, like that of a drowning horse. I turned to face the water, only to be greeted by the head of what appeared to be a horse rising out of the waves. This horse looked just as dead as the man from earlier, only something was different. I stood for about 3 seconds before I saw that the horse had one eye, one glowing yellow eye. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the horse walking towards me, and on its back was the hideous corpse that I'd seen previously. At this point, I smelled an awful, wretched scent in the air as that creature let out another nightmarish cry. Instantly, I received a terrible, sickly feeling, but I wasn't about to hang around to become some demon's snack, so I turned and sprinted to my car. I did not stop until I actually reached it, puking just before I literally jumped in and sped away. The whole time I drove, I would look in my rearview mirror to make sure I was safe. I couldn't escape that awful putrid smell until I finally reached the closest town. Once I made it to my relative's house, it was already nightfall. My uncle came out and greeted me, and it didn't take long for him to realize that something was off from me. He asked me if something was wrong, so I explained my experience to him. He sighed and patted me on the shoulder before walking me inside and preparing tea. Once we settled in inside, he told me stories that his grandfather used to tell him, stories about a demon from their old folk tales. These tales described the exact monster that I'd witnessed, a creature that frightened people for generations. Some may know it as the Kelpie or water horse, but I'll remember it as the thing I don't ever want to see again. Horror on the old farm. When I was around 5 years old, my family moved into an old farmhouse in Ohio. Now, I can't say that I've got perfect memory at times, but what happened in this house I can remember every single chilling memory of. It started on the night we moved in. My younger brother and myself chose our bedrooms, which were on the second floor. He got the second biggest room right beside 2 staircases, one in the hallway leading to the 3 technically 4 bedrooms. The second staircase was behind a door in Riley, my brother's room, but it led to a bedroom with a staircase leading down to the ballroom, or rather an area that looked like a ballroom. But the room I had was the biggest. It had 3 huge windows, a small closet, and a smaller window leading to the overhang of the front door. We set up my bed under the second huge window and had the other 2 on either side of my bed. We moved in on the very first night and settled down. My parents were downstairs in one of the bigger bedrooms. Being downstairs was much easier for my pregnant mother, and was only 3 to 4 months before she was to give birth. My 2 older siblings had come with us as well, staying in the last 2 rooms. Anyway, that first night, we all went to bed early. It was peaceful until something woke me up around midnight. I know it was midnight because my mother had been teaching me how to tell time for a couple of years at this point. Now, I never wake up this late in the night, never had before. I normally woke up really early in the morning back then, and that was normal, around 5 in the morning. I was slightly more mature then, though, so I didn't get up from my bed or call out to anyone. I simply sat up and began to rub my hands over my eyes. Then I tried to figure out what awoke me. I looked out the window on my right side to see nothing, then checked the window behind my back and again nothing. Then finally I checked the window on my left, but still nothing. Nothing that could have awakened me. I was about to give up and lay back down to go to sleep, until I remembered the last window that was in my room. The tiny window beside the closet that was about 3 feet away from my left window. I looked into the direction to put my nerves to rest and go back to sleep. I wished now that I'd just gone back to bed and never looked at that window that night. Leaning against the glass of the window was a huge, shadowy figure of a man with burning, bright red eyes. When I saw the figure, I thought it was Kyle checking up on me and my siblings, but then I locked eyes with his eyes, and I realized it wasn't him. I was frozen, fearful and terrified, staring into his eyes, which felt like they were digging a hole into my brain. I didn't move. I didn't look away. I could have, but it felt like if I had, I would have stopped breathing. But I was 5, so I couldn't have thought of holding it for a moment or two. The moment this being had moved, I screamed so loud and closed my eyes, hiding my eyes away from this thing's glare. My older brother, who had stayed up late to read a book, heard me screaming and came running to my room. When he burst into my room, he ran straight to me and grabbed me, calling my name to get me to stop screaming. He had gotten me to calm down for a few minutes of him talking with me quietly, but I was still terrified. I told him about the being by my window and how it tried to get closer to me, but he said something chilling to me. He said, "But we're the only ones in the room, and I didn't see anyone else when I got in here." That scared me even more. I didn't stay in that room the rest of the night. I stayed with Jordan for the rest of it. And until a month before I was to turn 6 years old, strange and terrifying things kept happening in that house. I never felt more safe and protected until we moved out of it. I'll say this, I never wanted to leave a house faster than that very moment, and I'll never return to it if it's the last thing I ever don't do. Some kids had race car beds. Other kids had big old bunk beds. But after hearing these stories, I would go back in time to tell my kid self to build a fortress bed, because no moat full of alligators is big enough for the crap people claim to see and experience out there, and I'd rather be ready for it. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a creepy experience of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. If you'd like to support the show, check the links below. There's a link to my merch store where you can get some creepy Darkness Prevails merchandise, and there's a link to my Patreon where you can help us stay afloat. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 6 dark forest horror stories. Brittany Kimbrough says, "I think I'm addicted to your channel." Well, be sure to contact the Poison Control Center, because this stuff is scary toxic. Rio Runner says, "I definitely won't be going into the woods anytime soon." Ah, come on now. If anything, these stories make me want to live in the woods until something eats me. The Human says, "You know what's scarier than the woods? Knowing that tomorrow is Monday." Well, hello, past people. It's me, Darkness from Wednesday, and I can tell you now, Wednesday is way better than Monday. Heartache and Whiskey says, perfect timing for cleaning on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Hello, Darkness from Canada." That sounds pretty fun. I've actually found myself enjoying doing dishes and watching YouTube videos every morning. And Ryder Walton says, "Got injured at work. Just what I needed to rest and recover. Fear is the best medicine." Well, glad I can help, and I hope your recovery is a fast one. Well, that brings me to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are on the way soon. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're awesome. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.